going to just start off with a few announcements. First of all, my name is Helen Worka Ragnakar, and I'm a volunteer with the Columbus Area Historical Society. I'm also the children's librarian at the public library, so I'm really excited. So history and museums are my first love in life. So I have been a curator and museum director before. And when my husband and I moved to Columbus, we were so excited to find out about this historical society and the lovely museum that they had over here on West James Street. Did any of you get to visit the museum before it closed last March? Good. It was so well done and so beautiful. Currently, our entire collection is in storage, and the items that were loaned to the society were returned to their donors unless they decided to keep them with the society. So we are actually still looking for a museum home. If you have any thoughts or ideas, please see one of our board members. We do have two of them with us this evening. Pat Bonus, our treasurer. Thank you, Pat. And Sheila Worthen is with us also tonight. She's our secretary. She's in the back there. So Columbus has a wealth of amazing and very rich history, which we are going to be diving into just one of many topics that we have to cover this evening. So a couple more housekeeping items. Normally we will be holding a business meeting prior to our Tap into History presentation. Next month in October, there will be officer elections. So the treasurer position will be opening up, and possibly the president position as well. We're also always looking for volunteers. So if you like what you see tonight, and if you have ideas for how we can continue to tell the story of Columbus history, please see one of us members or the board, as I mentioned earlier. We do have a sign-in sheet, which Anne is bringing around. So if you'd like to put down your name and email address or phone number and what you're interested in with the society, that would be great. If you have ideas for topics as well, you can put them on that sheet. We also have some ornaments this evening up at the front, some Christmas ornaments for 2022. This year, our ornament is for Rest Haven, which is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. We also have some of our books on Columbus history. And if you'd like to be supporting the society as a member, or in some of these different ways, please pick up a membership form as well. We do have a donation jar just behind the PowerPoint as well. We're a nonprofit organization, and everyone who's doing this is a volunteer. Can you guys still hear me okay?
No?
No?
I'll turn it up.
I have a really bad cold. I came down with it Saturday night, so sorry about that. Can you hear me better now?
That's good.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen and Ben. So a big thank you to Helen of Tea Time for hosting us. So this is the first of 3 Tap into History presentations that we're doing this fall. It will always be on the second Tuesday of the month. We hope that you will also patronize Helen this evening and tip their wait staff too. They work very hard for us all. You can follow them and us on our Facebook pages as well. All right, I'm going to take just a sip of water before we continue. Here's my face. Hi. It was the worst timing to come down with this, but mind over matter. I was not going to miss it. Okay, let's see. We believe that next month in October, our President Peter Kalin will be doing a presentation on the Sutton family and settlers in the 1800s. In November, we plan on having a wonderful presentation from G.D. Roberts. Their business has been in business for 150 years, so we're excited to have them come for our November presentation. Okay, how many of you knew that America had prisoners of war during World War II? Excellent, hands down. How many of you knew that we had German prisoners of war, not just Japanese internment camps? Very good. All right. And of that group, did you know that there was actually a prisoner of war camp here in Columbus?
Yep.
Wow. Okay, so we've got some real big history buffs here tonight. I love it. Okay, so America joined the war after Pearl Harbor, and so they agreed to help out Great Britain by taking the prisoners of war that they had in housing there and bringing them stateside to America. This was in large part due to how close they were to Germany. There was a definite threat and fear that Hitler would be delivering weapons to be airdropped over the prison camps that were in England. So this action would have allowed Germany to take over England, invade England without an actual full-scale without a full-scale invasion by arming German soldiers who were already in the country. There were actually several 100,000 German prisoners of war who were in Great Britain at this time. So, as a result, the US decided that moving prisoners stateside, where the resources were very plentiful, would help them to feed, clothe, house, and supply everything for the needs of the captured troops. This was versus spending a great deal of time, money, troop oversight, and resources overseas guarding the prisoners of war from the enemy armies, who may try to release them and regain their troop numbers. So Camp Columbus was one of many branch camps in Wisconsin. Across the US, base camps were formed, and Camp McCoy was the closest base camp to Columbus. It ran from 1942 to 1946. Many of you know where Fort McCoy is today, correct? Between Sparta and Toma. So there were actually 38 branch camps in Wisconsin, as we were saying. But 600 of those base camps, like Fort McCoy, were found across the U.S. Prisoners of war were actually transported to the camps from Liberty ships that were returning empty from Europe. They were actually transported via railroad passenger cars, traveling first class with upholstered seats, and they were even getting ice in their water in the 1940s. So they were getting treated very well. There was also a bathroom in each car and 2 guards per car. Okay, so this map was actually compiled by the Fond du Lac reporter, the FDL reporter. And it mimics very nicely the map that's on the back of the Solid Wisconsin book by Betty Cowley, who was one of my main sources of reference for this presentation. Now, you may have noticed that the word PW, or the initials PW, are appearing, not the letters POW. Well, they were called PWs prior to the 1950s. So Wisconsin housed over 20,000 enemy soldiers across the state. Here in Wisconsin, around Fort McCoy, there were 3,500 Japanese, 5,000 Germans, and nearly 500 Koreans housed at Fort McCoy. Fort Sheridan, Illinois also sent an additional 13,000 seasonal and year-round prisoners of war to work at the 38 branch camps around Wisconsin. Although not initially the plan to use prisoners of war for labor, it was decided soon after their arrival in order to help fight the labor shortage that was occurring during the war. Farmers, business owners, and even companies paid the military to hire prisoners. Prisoners were then paid with scrip. This saved the taxpayers millions of dollars. There were also incentive programs for the prisoners. The prisoners actually earned 80 cents a day for their labor. They were even allowed to create individual savings accounts where they could make deposits. They would receive this money at the end of the war. One man, Kurt Peckman, who would return to Wisconsin with his bride in 1949, actually took home $91 when he left in 1946. So let's look at the pay for some of the specific tasks. In Door County, orchards would pay prisoners of war 40 cents per hour. In the canning factories, such as here in Columbus and locally around Columbus, prisoners of war were paid 55 cents per hour. A farmer, independently employing prisoners of war, tended to pay by the pound for beans that were picked. Under certain war conventions from the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war couldn't work longer than 12 hours a day. They had to have regular breaks and go back to the camp when their shift ended. Now, these prisoners of war, these prison camps were actually not so top secret, as many of you already knew about them today. However, very little information was given to the public in the 1940s. There was a fear from the government and the Army that there would be panic, animosity, and even fraternization between the prisoners of war and the locals. After the war ended in 1945, the local press were invited to see Camp Columbus. They had questions about how well the prisoners were treated. Now, that sentence might make you think that they were questioning, were the prisoners treated well enough? No. Press thought that the prisoners were treated way too well. They were hearing that they were getting really good rations and like fresh vegetables and fresh fruits, but their rations were actually non-rationed items. They were coming from the farmers. They weren't the things that were being rationed in the cities across the country. Oh, also, very importantly, this is a topic that is getting a bit more press these days. There are two novels that have been written about Wisconsin German prisoners of war. One is called Margaret's War. It came out in about 2018, I think, by a Wisconsin author. And other books, too, have been printed. But the records were destroyed by the government in the 1950s. They didn't say how they were destroyed. Was it a flood or were they shredded? But they were in fact destroyed. So we don't know as much as we thought we would like. We don't know as much as we would like to know about what was happening with these prisoners and in these camps. Excuse me. So why Columbus? One of the reasons was that it was a rural community, so it would be easier to keep track of the prisoners. They really needed laborers desperately for the pea harvest, and Wisconsin's large German population was very encouraging to the Army in the hopes that the prisoners would be welcomed, but maybe not too welcomed. Interestingly, some of the prisoners actually had relatives who were living in Wisconsin. One man at a camp not in Columbus, his uncle would drive down in his wagon to pick him up and take him to his house where he was a butcher, and the Army wouldn't allow him to employ his nephew as a butcher, but like they would get together each week to have a meal together. So I thought it would be nice if we took a little peek at what Columbus looked like in the 1930s and 40s, leading up to the war, and when the prisoners of war were actually here. These images are from the Recollection Wisconsin collection that is through the Columbus Public Library and was actually submitted by the Columbus Area Historical Society. So you can actually see these postcards online yourself. So this fountain used to be outside of City Hall, and you can see here that it's got a fountain, a basin for the humans to be drinking out of, and then bowls at the feet for the dogs and cats and other pets to go by. And so this fountain was actually melted at the beginning of World War II for the metal drives. St. Mary's Hospital would have been here in Columbus when the prisoners of war arrived. This hospital was built in 1928, and this postcard is from circa 1930. So it was a 3-story building. Oh, we all know this little building, the library. At the time, it was called the Carnegie Library. It only changed names in the 1950s. So this is a fascinating postcard. We all know this gate, but where's this building? This was the entrance to City Park and Tourists Campsite. So Fireman's Park was at that time called City Park in the 1940s. So this postcard on the bottom is a real photo from 1940 of Columbus Fireman's Park showing the landscaping and a small building, possibly the rest haven in the background. I'm going to just read a little bit of this. During the 1920s, the park was a favorite place for motorists and campers to visit. In 1923, local pharmacist James Quickenden donated $10,000 for the construction of Rest Haven to provide these users with restroom and cooking facilities. And again, that's the ornament that we're doing this year to get ready for the 100th anniversary of the Rest Haven building. And there's a close-up drawing lithograph of it. Okay. So, where did the prisoners of war work in Columbus? Do any of you recognize this building? Yeah?
I know where it is. I live by there.
Very cool. And then...
It's now a mall. It's like a thrift shop now.
Oh, very close. That one's going to be in the next slide. But see back here, the water tower? This was the Dry Milk Company, which became Borden's in the 1930s. So it's a color lithograph postcard. So this was actually located on West James Street. The Dry Milk Company of New York opened the facility in late 1923 and was sold to Borden's in the 1930s. It continued operation until the late 1950s when the popularity of dried milk products, oh, that doesn't sound good to a Wisconsin girl like me, when the popularity of dried milk products waned, with the increasing prevalence of household electric refrigerators, making it easier to keep fresh milk year-round. But what did the prisoners do there? Well, it's pretty interesting. So we have a recollection from an unnamed resident in Columbus. Ice cream was a common dessert for prisoners of war at the Borden Milk Plant in Columbus. On the night shift alone, 75 to 100 prisoners of war would load 2 railroad boxcars with cans of ice cream powder. Does that sound good to you? Yeah. With ice cream powder, and most of those were headed for the Navy. The test samples were regularly distributed to the employees of the Borden factory, including the prisoners. At that time, Borden's processed about 200,000 pounds of milk a day into the powdered ice cream mix. So then it got nice and creamy. In addition to the local product, railroad tanker cars from across the country arrived daily full of the powdered ice cream to be canned there as well. The prisoners worked 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, helping to keep the factory going year-round. The plant fed the prisoners their noon meal or a midnight lunch. Another little memory from those lunches that they got was that the German prisoners were served corn on the cob. I like corn on the cob. But in Germany, what?
There's a viral song about corn on the cob.
There might be, but for the
I don't know it. I haven't listened to it.
I'll have to look that up. But
And the series today.
okay. So, but for the German prisoners, their swine were fed corn cobs. So they were very taken aback. Like that was the feed that was given to their livestock to fatten them up. But one of the men at the table, an American, but probably one of the guards, put butter on it and dug right in and said, "See, this is good." And so they all dug in and started eating it. And this recollection goes on to say that those prisoners liked it so much they actually asked for seeds to bring home to plant back in Germany. So a big turnaround on that. Okay, where's this young man?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's now the mall.
That's what?
I'm pretty sure that's the old mall.
That is, you are correct.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
back by
the-
the train tracks over there.
Yep, this is the old antiques mall, right down
Yeah.
down along the river. So, have any of you ever had Raminda peas and corn? No. Well, Raminda was one of the brands that was made from the Columbus Foods Corporation. That's their label there. So, canning peas, straight. Okay, so canning peas was a very important industry. To get all of your peas canned, it was a very important product during World War II. So Columbus Foods Corporation was actually the other main business in town where prisoners of war worked, again, not including local farmers. The pea crop in 1945 was so large that soldiers from Truax Field who were stationed there were actually sent to help and work during their hours off duty at the Columbus Foods Corporation. They worked almost side by side, but no conflict is documented between the soldiers and the prisoners of war. So after the pea harvest, those prisoners were actually sent to Sturgeon Bay to help with the cherry crop. 275 prisoners returned to Columbus after that, however, and they helped to pick and decastle, thank you, corn. I was trying to get to the word corn in the canning factory. Oh my goodness. So before prisoners of war could really be settled in here to Columbus, a few things had to happen. In order to house the prisoners of war, they had to follow the Geneva Conventions, and they had to add military guards to the population, but they also had to make improvements to the city. Improvements to water, sewage, and power. They used unused sheep sheds that were overhauled, and they were scrubbed, sanitized, and insulated to provide barracks, and again, follow the Geneva Convention guidelines. So, do these men look pretty unhappy to you? No. No, it seems to have been a very interesting setup. These photos are actually of prisoners taken in July of 1945. These images are from the Wisconsin Historical Society. You can go online and see them. These are prisoners of war. They're marching from their quarters to go to the trucks so that they could be shipped over to the cannery.
Exactly where were the quarters?
I've been trying to figure that out. I believe that they were, you do know?
Campbell Street on the backside.
Oh, okay.
On the backside of the cannery.
The big Quonset huts and all that were over there. That's great.
Oh, where Chisholm Raider was back there? Okay.
It's
Awesome.
all fenced off. All of the houses on the backside of Campbell Street were abandoned. And after the war, all those houses were available. And one of them, my family bought right after the war.
Thank you. Thank you. I love this. I love it when we can talk about history.
You know,
because
another
we
thing
know
about,
history.
when you're talking about the Borden's plant, all of those workers that worked in there because they were German, you know, MIG and TIG welding was a high-tech welding that was developed in Germany for stainless steel. All of that technology was brought into this area, and that's why we have so many stainless steel shops in this area.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was founded by German prisoners of war that actually stayed and they
They came back.
they came back, but they had to be sponsored by local relatives,
Yeah.
and they had to do time. I worked for one of them, and he had to do 10 years with an uncle before he got a sponsorship for citizenship to have his own business here.
Wow.
And that was stainless steel fabricators.
I'd love to actually talk to you more about that after this.
Well, you get a gold
Yeah.
star.
Yeah, this is Sarah Rose, everybody.
But That's why you have like Lyco and Hughes and, you know, you got Apache and all of these stainless steel shops where, because the Germans brought that technology in this area.
Wow.
Yeah, they really liked Wisconsin. Yeah, there's some wonderful stories of people coming back
Helen, where
here.
did you say the house?
Campbell Street. Mm-hmm. Yep. So here's another picture from the Historical Society, working with the pea vines. So on the uniform, do you see how many times this was painted? PW? Because, so there was actually a story of one prisoner who was given a uniform that didn't have the PW, and he was accused of stealing the clothes, and he denied it. He said, no, this is how it was given to me. They didn't have any more with the letters painted on. And there's a caricature sketch, actually, not a caricature, but there's actually a sketch in the Cowley book, Solid Wisconsin, depicting prisoners painting the letters onto each other's uniforms while they're wearing them. So another one of the things that they would do around camp was they would be the cooks and carpenters, and so they'd be baking bread for each other.
It's okay, you can keep your hair.
They were taking English classes as well. They had a strong interest in learning English. Here's one of the prisoners building furniture as well. Oh, just backing up, actually. Okay, so we were talking about detasseling corn. Thank you again for your help with that. In mid-October of 1945, the corn pack ended and the Camp Columbus closed permanently. Again, this is in October 1945. 170 of the prisoners of war went on to Michigan to do logging work and to work in the wood pulp industry, but others were sent back to Europe via Fort Sheridan, Illinois. By mid-September, the numbers reported by the Army of how much the prisoners of war earned for the government was $59,420. So the math on that, with today's inflation from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they made, in 1 year, less than a year actually, at Camp Columbus, $972,291.76. So that's nearly $1 million that they made for the U.S. government by using prisoner of war labor. So, again, some of the duties that they had when they were at the camp included laboring on surrounding farms, working with peas, corn, even tomatoes, onions, and cabbage. Non-commissioned officers were cooks, secretaries, cleaning, maintenance, laundry, doing the laundry, and they were teachers, and they had other jobs as well. Because prisoners, per the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war could not perform jobs related to the military. So for their accommodations and recreation, this is what it would have looked like over by Campbell Street. So you can see the fence that was erected. Several camps had problems where local girls were going and talking to the soldiers. There were a few instances of relationships starting or of people on one side or the other wanting to start the relationships. Several times young women would share their recollections that they might be delivering something in the field to their father, or they might be serving at the table, and a young man would say in German, "I like you," and then the girl would blush and run away. But other girls were not so blushing, and they did approach purposely and with purpose the fences to do that, to meet them, and the fraternization occurred. So the prisoners of war also created, they worked on building their own housing too, because they were, in their past life, not only welders, but they were also ministers, carpenters, artisans, and they worked very hard, plumbers, bakers, and so they found their way in America, in the camps, to make things a bit more at home. You can see here one of the areas of accommodation. That looks better than some studio apartments, maybe, better finished, you might say. They also, this laundry setup looks terrible. I mean, they're having to do their laundry on the floor of the barracks. So that's 4 men right there doing that. They also did have very good opportunities for recreation. So down in Hartford, just down the road, they actually have photos of the soccer team like standing in their uniform, like in their soccer uniforms, waiting to play their game. Now, there was one escape effort in all of Wisconsin. Okay, actually, kind of 2, but one was just he went to the bar and they were like, where is this guy? So they sent out they called all the guards back to camp, and like 2 hours later they found him. He was just drinking at the bar like, with some locals. So that wasn't here in Columbus, but this real escape happened in the spring of 1944, so soon after Camp Columbus had opened. And a 19-year-old and a 30-year-old had gone missing. They ran away. The local radio was notified, so they broadcast to area citizens, farmers, and 2 sheriffs. The sheriff from Dane County and then the deputy sheriff locally went out looking. They did a whole posse, 2 posses actually. And then the 19-year-old stopped at a farm in Rio and said, can you please just send me back? This is, never mind, I don't want to escape anymore. And then Ermeling, he stopped at another farmhouse outside of Rio, but he was recognized and he did not turn himself in, but he was captured. The sheriff came and got him. Neither man stayed at Camp Columbus, and no future escape attempts were recorded. Now, when prisoners caused trouble, they tended not to be seen again at the same camps. That to me says that they were probably sent back to the base camp at Fort McCoy, but I'm purely speculating there. Another type of instance where you might not see someone returning to a camp was if they were very aggressive. So in my research, I came across the fact that there were 2 different waves of German soldiers, prisoners of war, sent to Wisconsin. The first wave was captured in northern Africa with Rommel and his troops. And they were the very epitome of what you'd hear about, like the strong, blonde-haired, very tough, very like marching in step they'd even be doing at the camps here in Wisconsin. Very tough and very like very Nazi, very pro-propaganda. And so some of those soldiers, those prisoners of war, would cause trouble, and then they'd be sent somewhere else. But the second wave was usually, the second wave of German prisoners sent to Wisconsin later on in 1945, they were captured during the Battle of Normandy and shortly thereafter. So they tended to be an older group of men who really had just been like farmers, and they were conscripted. They weren't like the original batch, they weren't like, they were just, we want to get home to our families. So that was very interesting. So there are many wonderful recollections in this book in Salt Lake, Wisconsin, that we've been referencing here throughout the talk. And I know the font is a little bit small on this one, but some of the recollections included how Columbus people would feed the prisoners of war and give them things, like maybe a pair of shoes. This was actually illegal. It was against the law for some time, but the law did get changed. Prisoners of war, for the most part, were farmers in their home country, not Nazi fanaticists. They were ministers, as we said, butchers, artisans, and even stonemasons. Columbus locals told stories of how the prisoners of war were fascinated by the number of cows on area farms. One minister, when he saw 30 cows on one farm, He said, if we had 2 cows in Germany, we were rich. He was just in shock. Local citizens did appreciate the laborers because their help really saved the crops in 1944 and 1945. The citizens, even in Columbus, they gave the camp a piano, an organ, violins, a guitar and saxophone. And then with the support of the YMCA, they were given a French horn and a drum set. So they formed a camp orchestra. So that was a pretty great fun fact about Columbus, Camp Columbus. Excuse me. Lots of times when the farmers would be hosting prisoners of war at their farms, they'd actually there was one man who he made it a point to invite them to harvest his onion field. And it was such a quick job. There were maybe, I think 12 and a half of them. So almost 20 soldiers, prisoners of war, German prisoners of war. And they were like, wow, what a quick job. And so the farmer said, come in. So he had them go in his house and he had a huge, almost wedding feast laid out for them. He wanted to treat them. He wanted to talk to them about life back in Germany and the mother country. And he had the guards stay in the kitchen. Something very interesting about the guards in the Wisconsin camps is that they were almost not even guards. Basically, they were just standing around watching. They would even lend their guns to the prisoners of war if they wanted to, or they maybe even forget them. And one prisoner of war said, you left your gun back on the truck, you might want to go get it. It was very, very different at the branch camps. And you know how I was speaking at the beginning about the fact that it would have been a lot of troop engagement to be guarding the prisoners of war in Europe. Well, here they had retired soldiers from veterans, even from World War I, and farmers who were just like, oh, I'll come and watch, So it was a very interesting relationship between prisoners and guards. The majority of prisoners of war actually did not want to return to Germany, as we were talking about. Back home, their farms were destroyed by war, and they had nothing to return to. More than one family talked about when a prisoner of war would come to their home and see one of their children who was blonde and blue-eyed, the German soldier, prisoner of war, he would start crying because it reminded him of his own son that he'd left, who was only 1 year old. So as the war came to a close, many locals received gifts made by prisoners of war. This is some very fine craftsmanship that was done here. There's also a very beautiful description of a nativity set that was done by one camp here in Wisconsin. It was just amazing to hear how they would spend their time and what they would leave for the people that they were imprisoned by. So let's see. So when the prisoners of war would return to Germany, they would be interviewed by the Wehrmacht investigators. They were asked, what were the prisoner of war camp conditions like? How were you treated? And despite being incarcerated, being in prison, most reported that they were well treated and respected. So the press, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the press was very critical about how well the German prisoners of war were being treated. Here's a better list of what the German prisoners of war were eating. Carp, pickled herring, fruits, vegetables, and other non-ration foodstuffs. When more Germans were being sent, or when more laborers, when communities would be told that more prisoners of war would be coming, they would be wary of what was going to happen, but like I was saying, how there were the Rommel soldiers who were very fierce and very, attached to their units. But, it sounds like they were surprised by the older gentlemen who were just farmers like them. Veterans would comment on how when they were working here at the Columbus Canning Factory and having been stationed at Truex Field, one veteran said, 5 months ago, I was shooting at them Krauts in France, and here I am working with them. So all of the prisoners of war had to leave the country and return to Germany. They had no choice to stay in the US, but they could return. So, just a warning, the next two photos show a big contrast between American prisoners of war in Japan and German prisoners of war in America. So please be prepared, they're very skeleton-like. For families in Wisconsin, it was very important to them that they be taking care of these prisoners of war, for most of them, for many families, because their own sons, brothers, fathers, husbands were overseas. And, again, sometimes they were relative against relative, because a lot of German immigrants came to Wisconsin, came to America to flee the Kaiser, and they didn't want to be conscripted in the army. So families were reunited through these prisoner of war camps, but then their relatives had to go back home to Germany. There was one daughter, however, in Dodgeville, Wisconsin, who remembered that "follow your heart" was Mom's motto when she let the prisoners of war save their sack lunch for an afternoon snack and invited them into our dining room for a big home-cooked noon meal. She had 2 sons-in-law in the service at the time, and this was her assurance that if they, or her own sons, were ever prisoners of war in an unfamiliar land, someone might return the kindness. So thank you all very much, especially for putting up with my voice today. We will be back next month on Tuesday, October 11th at 6:30 p.m. I'd like to say a big thank you to Sue Reese. She's been with the Historical Society for many years. She really provided me with a great deal of this information, supplementing the Solid Wisconsin book and images from her previous presentations. Thank you to Peter Kaland, our president, for his research assistance, and again to Helen Schwartz of Tea Time for hosting us. And thank you to the board of the Historical Society for being open to this idea. It's very exciting. I listed our sources. If you have any questions, you can email us, but I'm also happy to take a few quick questions now, if you have any.
I want to say thank you very much.
You're welcome.